around Bainbridge. So make sure you're within that safe place, because it may not just be a tornado, it's also going to be those strong wind gusts. And winds can do some damage of their own, knocking over trees. You can maybe have some loss of power. So make sure you have ways to stay connected with the overall information that we're continuing to share. Other analysis tools at our disposal: the shear markers, the shear rates. They're highlighting areas in red on the north side of Bainbridge, and also a separate zone here a good bit to the south, showing where the radar is showing the strongest indications of the shear. The wind's going in different directions in a small amount of space. So that's where we're seeing at least some ongoing trends based on further analysis of where we can see enough of a circulation that's sufficient to maybe cause a tornado to touch down. So several of these causing some significant storm threats, especially when it comes to hail, as well as the threat of that red, which shows where the rotation is most likely to be occurring. This is maybe one scan old, so I would displace this maybe a step, a mile or two towards the east. These black shades indicating a high likelihood of large hail. So if you're not getting in on wind gusts around Bainbridge, you're likely going to start to get in on some hail that can come down with that very heavy rain. So this is a pretty hefty storm that's going to be continuing to move to the east at roughly 30 to 35 miles per hour. So there will be some areas that can be downstream from this that can get in on the effects of this storm if it continues to move on that path. So we'll put on an estimated time of arrival, a storm track for this, so folks who are within the Highway 84 corridor, maybe over towards the Cairo vicinity, if it's moving at about 35 miles per hour, here are some of the neighborhoods and communities that can be in the path of this. So in Climax, current time is 1:38. This is estimating it can be around you at 1:52. I'd give it maybe 10 minutes from now before you can start to get in on some of its effects. Wiggum, farther down on 84 in Grady County, can be around you around 2 o'clock. And then Capel, which is just a bit north of Cairo, right around 2:15. So even folks in Cairo and Grady County, you don't have a tornado warning. You have a severe thunderstorm warning for this very same system. So that is a point that you need to be concerned about. Plus, we're seeing this symbol here, which is indicating a possibility of debris being lofted in the air. Let's use our debris tracker here to see what kind of indications we're seeing. It kind of goes along with that circulating mode, where there's a little shade of fade out, a little extra blue that's being shown here on the radar. It's kind of a messy pattern, not quite as clear cut as I would like to see in something that's definitely picking up debris. Just going to step off just for a moment to kind of clear that indicator that the radar is detecting. But nonetheless, there is a possibility that we can certainly have some ongoing gusty winds, and maybe that in itself can cause a little extra storm damage. I'll just go ahead and say it. It's not confirmed that it's causing any kind of damage, but there's certainly a possibility if I just rock this data back and forth, kind of on the edge of where we have that, but nonetheless, and I'll highlight it very quickly before I step back on camera, that can be a zone where we had at least some indications, if that is a legitimate indicator of perhaps some debris being picked up, or at least some kind of solid matter other than rain being detected. That is certainly a possibility just based on what we're seeing there. So Titan radar did indicate and highlight that zone, and not often do we see a zone like that that's picked up on just basic storm tracking. So that does give some legitimacy to the possibility of ongoing severe weather elements that can perhaps include very strong gusty winds and even that large hail. I do think that brighter shade there, I'll show a hail path, which gives you an indication of the history of the likelihood of hail within this thunderstorm. So essentially just lining up on 84, that's a zone where we've had at least a high likelihood and even a high probability of some hail that can be large. In fact, a new update for the existing severe thunderstorm warning indicates that some hail sizes can be upwards of perhaps 1 3/4 of an inch. So we're talking maybe about ping pong ball size hail. That is a possibility coming through Bainbridge and moving along Highway 84. So multifaceted severe weather risk that is imminently happening here in Decatur County, including the possibility to have enough circulation to cause a tornado. We're going to zoom into our velocity scan right here. And again, if you've been following us over the years and you kind of understand how the velocity works, bright shades of green versus bright shades of red right next to each other can indicate a system that is causing circulation. So that's what we're seeing right here, with a very bright area of green indicating some very strong strong wind gusts. We'll put a few samples on here so you can have an idea of what the radar is estimating winds could be here on the southeastern side of Bainbridge. So estimated winds here about 50 miles per hour, and then just a mile or two off to the east, there are some wind gusts that are being clocked at another high rate of speed. So we are going to see perhaps that ongoing trend of some circulation that can give us a little extra concern for circulation within this region. So this will be heading towards the climax area over the course of the next 5 to 10 minutes. So you can have at least some of the indications of circulation and the rough weather to go along with this traveling thunderstorm as it continues to move to the east. This tornado warning for Decatur County in effect until 2 o'clock for the possibility, especially within this zone here, approaching climax, in between climax and Bainbridge. That's going to be a primary zone where we can see some of the effects of twisting or rotating winds in the lower base of the cloud, and that can maybe cause a tornado to develop. So our debris tracker mode, we look for these gaps in the red and the pink where it can maybe indicate. And if we correlate that with the positioning of where the winds are, where those strongest winds are, where we have the radar indicator, its signature, if you will, of how we have this hook going around like this, and then a gap right in here on Highway 84, that can be an indication of how the winds are trying to twist around in this region. And we bring back that debris tracker mode, it does tend to correspond with this gap here, that there is a possibility that there can be something other than rain being detected on the radar, and it does tend to match up even with our shear rate product here. We have this red shade here on the east side of Bainbridge, closing in on the Otisco area and the corridor that goes there. But climax, you're kind of next in line for this action to move in your general direction. That's why a tornado warning is in effect for the next 17 minutes or so for sections of Decatur County, especially the east central part. Attapulgos, not necessarily your concern. Looks like a new tornado warning is being issued downstream for that. So this is now for Grady County in anticipation of the movement of this particular portion of the thunderstorm. Along Highway 84, Whigham, Magnolia area over towards Cairo, Woodland, and Midway, that being in Grady County, those are going to be some areas that can get in on this thunderstorm as it continues to move to the east, and it can continue to produce indications, strong indicators, very consistent trends of a circulation that can touch the ground if it hasn't done so already, just based on what I've been able to observe here in our various modes of weather analysis on the radar. 53 mile per hour winds on one side, 54 on another. So that is a good indication of very tight circulation, winds going away from the radar in Tallahassee and then winds going towards. So that is the circulation, and if you do the math, that can mean some very significant strong winds here along Highway 84. So Thomasville Road, that's the Highway 84 name for that portion of 84 in Decatur County, and that's where we have at least the highest indicators of where we have some strong gusts of wind that can do some damage, and perhaps even more than just some wind-related damage. So we do have a tornado warning here in Decatur County, which is now stretching into portions of Grady County for this thunderstorm that is still capable of creating some very rough weather. Climax, if you are not in your safe shelter, in an interior room, in a sturdy home or sturdy structure, you need to get there now. In Cairo, you may want to start doing the same. This thunderstorm is about 10-15 minutes to your west, and it's going to keep on moving to the east. This has been hooking around very tightly, and it has been showing the indications where we do have the circulation. The latest shear marker still on the strong side and lining up right on Highway 84. So Whigham, you'll need to make sure you're taking appropriate shelter within the next 5 to 10 minutes, because this thunderstorm will continue to make its move towards the east, and it will carry these ongoing trends of strong gusty winds, likely some large hail beginning to exit Bainbridge, so you'll still have some steady rain behind you, but in climax, it's definitely a good idea to make sure you have appropriate shelter in place right now, because this storm is barreling towards you, and it will make a clean sweep right through. I say storm, I don't have a confirmation of something on the ground, but a lot of the indicators continue to show that we can have at least something that can pick up, the winds can pick up any kind of loose debris or any kind of tree limbs and whatnot that can maybe be lifted into the air, even if it's not something that's actually touching the ground. If something were, that would make that possibility more likely. And again, with the overall trends of the radar scans, we've been seeing that high possibility within our region here in the eastern side of Decatur County beginning to move towards and through climax. So that's going to be a zone where you can get in on some wind and storm-related damage and other effects that can cause some adverse conditions for you within the next few minutes here along 84 in Decatur County. So we'll zoom in a little more tightly. We don't see the winds coming right on top of each other. If the bright red and bright green are like right next to each other, that would give us a very clear-cut indicator of something that's on the ground. But they're very close together. You do have the winds that are connected to this storm. They are flowing in very strongly in and then out of the thunderstorm complex itself. And it's going to move right through the climax area right now. So if this area is where we have that low-level circulation, it is moving through the Attapulgos Climax Road area and Thomasville Road and the Salem Church Road, where those three roads tend to come together. And then on the north and east side of Climax towards Pelham Road, those will be some areas where this circulation pattern is likely to continue to have very direct effects in the town of Climax going into the near-term future. When I say near-term, I'm talking like right now. So this is definitely something you don't want to fool around with. Folks should be inside in a sturdy shelter to make sure that this thunderstorm, if it can drop a tornado, there is that higher possibility within that portion of climax in eastern Decatur County. Now, this is an old scan of where the rotation was being shown, certainly a strong indication of earlier rotation. It may take a few seconds for this to catch up with our current data, but nonetheless, the trends have been continuous over the last 10-15 minutes. There's the latest scan. It kind of closes in on the chances for rotation, but again, close to the climax area, that's where our radar analysis has been showing a higher chance for circulation that can create the spin needed to put a tornado on the ground. This red shade here showing where we had earlier large hail likelihood within Bainbridge. So definitely if this storm has gone by you and maybe the winds are settling down, you're not necessarily in the clear because of the overall risk of hail that can linger as this thunderstorm moves through. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you're in Grady County, I'd say Whigham, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, you'll need to make sure you're taking shelter because we do have the wind forces with this heading in your direction. We'll put on another quick little cone here to show you where the thunderstorm is forecast to move. Given that it may be moving at about 35 miles per hour, my arm is kind of hiding the wind gauge there, or the MPH scale, but nonetheless, climax is pretty much on top of you right now. In Whigham, it'll be there around the 2 o'clock hour. Cairo, you've got 2:15 on this estimated time of arrival with this thunderstorm, so that still gives you a good 15-20 minutes or so of head time to make sure that you are protected, your livestock is protected for farming interests around this region, and to make sure everything is secure where it needs to be when this storm comes through, because it can give you that possibility of very strong gusty winds. I say a high likelihood of strong gusty winds, and still indications that are showing a possible tornado that can be dropped from this thunderstorm as it starts to cross the Decatur-Grady County line along Highway 84. So those are going to be areas most susceptible to the nasty effects that this storm can give off. Stepping off just for a moment to take a look at some of the reports coming in with our communication through the National Weather Service. Bainbridge Airport getting a gust of 64 miles per hour recently. That was about 20 minutes ago when the thunderstorm was starting to move through Decatur County Airport. So there is still the ongoing possibility that some of those characteristics of wind could certainly make their way into Grady County right now. So that's why we're continuing our live coverage of tracking this thunderstorm in southwestern Georgia that has prompted 2 separate tornado warnings. And when tornado warnings are up within any part of our region, we're going to cover them until they are no longer a threat. So if you were expecting to watch GMA 3, I appreciate your understanding that we do have a threatening weather situation for our friends and neighbors in South Georgia, and that's why we're continuing our coverage up until the expiration of our current tornado warnings, one of which is in Decatur County, set to expire at 2 o'clock. The other is in Grady County, including Cairo, and that's set to expire at 2:30. So as long as there is still this ongoing trend of very gusty winds and circulation that can be shown on our various radar products, that does mean the likelihood, the possibility for a tornado to be in existence in this region is relatively high, higher than your typical severe thunderstorm warning. So folks in Climax, you've got the weather coming over you right now, the rough weather with gustier winds. Wiggum, you're kind of next in line, and it seems to be just going right along Highway 84. So if you're along that route or on either side of it by a couple of miles, you've got to make sure you're staying in that protective state of being, because of the very strong winds, considerably strong winds that can cause some very rough damage. There could be a more significant thunderstorm wind threat from this than, again, your average strong or low-wind severe thunderstorm. I'm getting a report here of trees and power lines down west of Bainbridge in the industrial park, and also numerous reports of hail ranging from pea to quarter size. So those are some of the latest pieces of information of what has been happening in Bainbridge in the last 20 minutes, now being confirmed as the information gets filtered through and reaches the National Weather Service and then distributed. So now we're seeing the confirmation of hail, as well as that very strong wind gust at Decatur County Airport about 20 to 25 minutes ago. So this is definitely verifying in terms of wind. Haven't seen anything that confirms a tornado, and if we did have a confirmed tornado, we would have purple flashing boxes. That would be the National Weather Service's classification of something that has definitely been detected on radar, and that can kind of upgrade the status of the warning. But we're not quite there yet. Still some strong signs of circulation, and the threat continues to show the possibility of circulation that will be moving to the east of Climax and approaching the Wiggum area over the next several minutes. So folks who are there, and especially down from there, east of there on 84, Cairo, you've got to take this seriously. Thunderstorms do change in their form and their ability to cause severe weather elements, but this has been one that I've been tracking ever since it was in Houston County, Alabama, triggered a couple of tornado warnings there near the Dothan area, and this is pretty much the same portion of that thunderstorm that's beginning to move into a warmer environment. It's been kind of warming up today, and that's one of the pieces of the formula that's needed to get these thunderstorms to start acting up like they are. So that's why there's been a higher concern over the last few hours for perhaps a few spots within this broader line to cause a tornado. And it seems like at this point, it's that particular zone there along Highway 84, just north of the state line. Thomasville, you don't have any kind of warnings quite yet. But this thunderstorm is moving at a good clip, about 35, 40 miles per hour. And given doing just the rough mental math, you could see maybe this portion of the thunderstorm cross through on the eastern side of Grady County in the next 30 to 45 minutes. So there's certainly a high possibility that if this particular portion of the storm holds itself together and keeps moving to the east, you can get some of this effect in the Rose City. So you don't have a warning quite yet, but you can see one. I would certainly anticipate at least a severe thunderstorm warning being extended geographically to the east because of the presence and the history of this thunderstorm and how it has been causing the significant hail, been causing the gustier winds that are still being indicated here, and perhaps still enough of a twisting motion. Latest shear rate as it comes up does show at least maybe a little diminishing of the intensity. That red shade there now just to the southeast of Climax, southwest of Wiggum, right on the county line. That's the radar's idea of where the strongest circulation can be. And you don't have to have something that touches the ground. I wouldn't advise going out there to see what's going on, but if one were to do that, you could perhaps see how those clouds in the lower base of the cloud are kind of rotating around based on what we're seeing there. So there's definitely a good bit of evidence that continues to show the severity and the strong nature, strong to say the least, but definitely the possibility of severe weather elements continuing to take place within this thunderstorm. Now, the latest velocity data, the wind patterns, showing a little bit of a spread between the strongest winds coming out of the climax area and the winds coming up into the thunderstorm. So going back to the radar, you can kind of see this is the zone where this little bulge here in the radar data around Magnolia to Nickelville, that shows winds that are coming strongly out of the thunderstorm. On the backside of this, we have some of the inflowing air that can cause the cloud to be tall and create that cycle of hail development across areas of central Decatur County, eastern Decatur County rather. So this is still an indication that we have very strong winds that are beginning to push through the Whigham area, at least barely to your south, and still close enough to where you can get some of those very strong winds coming in your direction as well. So I believe this is along Highway 111 over here, and then the route moving into Whigham is where we're going to see at least the height of some of those stronger winds coming into the western side of Grady County. So near Whigham and to the south, that's where you have the strongest wind patterns based on what we're seeing here on the radar. So this is kind of on the very northern fringe of Calvary, and then north to there in Magnolia. So I say the Magnolia, Nickelville communities, there's going to be some areas where you can have the strongest winds, and maybe not so much of an organized circulation, although I wouldn't discount the possibility of seeing maybe a little bit more tightening because these types of thunderstorms do tend to cycle in their overall strength. They can kind of really gust out and get that tight circulation and then kind of backing off. That's just the dynamic nature of a thunderstorm, and a severe thunderstorm at that. So there is still the possibility, the high likelihood throughout the central portions of Grady County over the next 30 minutes or so, where this action will begin to emerge out of Decatur and cause some gustier winds along the 111 route going from Calvary through Reno and into Cairo and along Highway 84. So use extra caution, use common sense. If you haven't found that place of shelter yet, don't necessarily worry about the details about, oh, there's no tornado, I haven't seen anything. You know, this has caused winds, and you have a measurement of 64 mile per hour wind gusts around the Decatur County Airport. 64 mile per hour winds can definitely do some damage. You don't have to have a funnel touching the ground to get any kind of damage going on. So there's definitely some indications that we continue to have those wind hazards that come with this thunderstorm. Even if it's not connected to something that's been on the ground, you've got to take it seriously. You've got to make sure you stay inside, put as many walls between you and the outdoors as you can, because that will help to protect you from any kind of storm-related winds. If it's straight line winds, like I said, they can do perhaps considerable amounts of damage compared to a weak tornado. Our evening anchor and managing editor Channing Frampton coming in just showing me this indication, this report from near Bethany of down trees blocking Highway 253 to the southwest of Bainbridge. Also some minor roof damage to a structure in that area. So southwest of Bainbridge on Highway 253, and that was of about 1:30 this afternoon. So again, another piece of evidence to put on the list that thunderstorm winds can certainly do extra damage and can slow down your commute. It can cause you to lose power. You don't have to have a tornado to get those effects of wind-related damage. So Cairo, Whigham, and then south through Nickelville, those are the zones where we continue to monitor for the strong wind potential, maybe a little bit of extra twisting motion from time to time. This may have been kind of, again, cycling back into maybe not so much of a circulation-driven hazard, but more of a straight-line wind pattern, especially on the southern edge of this, where we still have the possibility of gusty winds, and the hail indicators continue to show a steady trend of hail likelihood, which has moved out of Decatur County, where again there were confirmations of various sizes of hailstones, and moving into the western side of Grady County at the top of the hour. So we can have that hazard also a factor moving towards the Cairo to Whigham, rather Reno area here in the Grady County vicinity going into the next few minutes as this severe thunderstorm, also triggering a whole bunch of lightning. We haven't focused on lightning all that much, but this has definitely had its share of frequent lightning flashes over the last 30 minutes plus. And you hear the lightning, you see the lightning, hear the thunder. That's definitely an indication that you got to stay inside. Thank you for watching WTXL TV, Tallahassee, Thomasville, Valdosta. I'm First to Know Chief Meteorologist Casanova Nurse. It's 2 o'clock. We're on the air with live First to Know weather coverage of a severe thunderstorm that has been showing indications of tornadic potential consistently over the last half hour or so, and that thunderstorm is now moving into Grady County, just a few miles outside of Cairo. So we're still continuing in our live storm coverage for the possibility of very rough weather coming into the Cairo vicinity and the western side of Grady County within the next few minutes. We have a new extension of the severe thunderstorm warning, which now does include Thomas County. So it's the same thunderstorm that is moving east steadily across Highway 84 and along Highway 84. So now in anticipation of its approach into Thomas County between now and 3 o'clock, the severe thunderstorm warning is now stretched into your area. It also includes the far northern edge of Jefferson County, northern Leon County, northeastern Gadsden County, and a portion of northwestern Brooks County. So anywhere essentially along Highway 84, that's the prime zone for this thunderstorm to start to move into, and that's where we have the highest risk for some of the strongest weather elements coming from this thunderstorm. So if you are along Highway 84 and you get word of the severe thunderstorm warning in Thomas County, now is the time to at least assess where the storm is, what your storm preparedness action is. If you are ready to go to that safe place, if that comes necessary, you know where you need to go. And that's a good thing. If you do not know where your safe place is, consider the lowest floor of a building in an interior room, preferably one without windows, because if you have wind and something comes through that window, shatters glass, that's a hazard. So make sure you're finding that place of safe shelter in Thomas County, and you have to know where that safe place is right now in Cairo, because this thunderstorm is coming at you right now. Very wicked lightning, loud claps of thunder, heavy rain, and likely some strong wind gusts coming through the Wiggum towards the Reno area as the thunderstorm continues to move to the east at about 35 miles per hour. The overall pattern of gusty winds continues to be evident with this, as we've been tracking for the last few minutes here with our velocity products. Remove the lightning data so it doesn't kind of mix in with everything. There's definitely strong output of winds, but there's not a whole lot of bona fide twist that would get a tornado to form based on the evidence that we see here. So there's a little bit of a separation in that data, and that can result in less wind shear, which can kind of cause any kind of circulation to stay on the weaker side. So again, seems to be pulling back from its earlier strength mode, and we'll see if that factors into the need for this tornado warning to continue. But that does not mean the winds are just going to collapse to nothing. You're still going to have a good batch of strong downpours, and the winds can come along with that and create those stronger gusts of 60 miles per hour. So that's definitely a possibility in and around Cairo and along Highway 93, 111, and 84. Those are going to be some of the more traveled routes within the city where you will start to have that weather coming in from west to east. And that's going to be the trend of, at least when it comes to the winds as well as the rain. It's going to start to carry over within the next few minutes here in central Grady County. So there's good enough reason to continue to heed some of those warnings that are out there and make sure folks are properly sheltered. It kind of sounds repetitive if you've been watching us over the last few minutes, but that's kind of the nature of severe weather. We're monitoring what's happening, get a new scan, do some analysis, and then just kind of rinse and repeat as we see new pieces of evidence coming from this thunderstorm that can determine whether it's strengthening, whether it can cause a tornado, or whether it's going to be a good bit of strong gusty wind. So there's definitely the wind aspect that is going to remain with this no matter what phase it goes into. But right now it does seem like there is a little bit of a detachment in the opposite flowing winds, maybe a little broader expanse of the winds coming into the storm and then flowing out with the heavy rain and hail. So that's a decent indication that maybe there's not so much of a tight, close-in circulation that would immediately drop a tornado from this. So that's an encouraging sign. The warning is still up. The National Weather Service determines whether to cancel it early before its expiration. The current expiration for that warning is 2:30, but at least there's still the ongoing trend of large hail, which has been a consistent trend since it made its way through Decatur County. Still a high likelihood based on our scale here. The darker those pinks, the more probable we're seeing some hail. Maybe a slight drop off in the certainty of hail compared to when it was in Decatur County, but there's still going to be some times of likely small to moderate hail contained within this as it approaches Cairo over the next several minutes. And our other storm threat analysis tool does show a lack of the overall rotation. That red shade that we saw earlier in Decatur County is showing none of that rotation threat, but definitely a higher trend of large hail threat that can easily be upwards of a quarter size or even larger than that in some cases. So within this brighter shade of pink south of Magnolia, some indications based on this analysis product of maybe hail that was up towards ping pong ball size. So that's certainly a possibility with this thunderstorm as it keeps on moving to the east. So even though there is a tornado warning, and that's why we're doing extended coverage, don't just dwell on the tornado aspect of the storm. It carries other hazards as well, and those hazards will make their way across 111 now, and now beginning to aim towards Highway 93 near and south of Cairo. So there's the latest scan. And when you see this little curvature in the radar data in this case, that tends to show us that we have a good bit of outflowing wind coming out of the thunderstorm. So we have a very strong wind pattern that will be crossing Highway 93. I think there's a little creek, a public boat ramp that's in that general vicinity. That's going to be a zone where you can have these strong winds coming through. So keep that in mind for folks who are between Cairo and Beachton. Those are some areas where gusty winds are a likelihood, and that can certainly affect the quality of your afternoon in regions around there. All right, new report coming in as we clear some of the telestrator action there. We do have a new report from near Climax coming in from the National Weather Service of several trees down near US 84 along a 1 mile stretch to the west-northwest of Climax. So that was reported at 1:49. This thunderstorm continuing to show its abilities from the past of creating gusty winds that can knock over trees. So along 84, that's going to be a hazardous drive, especially in the vicinity of where this storm is and likely where it's set to go. Director, I have WSI-2 on the Cairo weather stem camera, and it will show the campus of SRTC, and that's kind of closing in on where the thunderstorm has gone. We have seen occasional lightning, especially coming in the distance. There are some trees that are swaying in the winds. They're not incredibly gusty right now from this perspective, but nonetheless, the thunderstorm is essentially right on top of central Grady County and the county seat, so you do have some rougher conditions there around the Cairo area, and maybe some of the strongest winds just coming into your south. So that's going to be a zone along 93 as you're coming from the state line north into town, around the Archibald Medical Facility there, the Grady Medical Facility. That's going to be a particular zone where some gusty winds can certainly travel, especially south of there, south of when you come into town, where you do have some ongoing trends along Highway 93 where you can have strong winds. I think that's around the Pine Park Road area, if I'm not mistaken. So that's going to be a zone where you have particular gusty winds that can start to flow from the outflow of this thunderstorm. And it also can contain some hail, especially in the southern extent here on 93. This is the southern edge of the tornado warning, but well encompassed within the ongoing severe thunderstorm warning, and then the one that also carries into Thomas and Brooks County, where this thunderstorm is likely to go from here. So Thomasville, that thunderstorm is not too far to your west, continuing to move east at about 35 miles per hour. So that will start to move into your general area within the next few minutes. So make sure you're considering, it's long past time to consider taking protective measures because the thunderstorm will be moving into Cairo. There's no guarantee that the tornado warning will carry forward into Thomas County, especially given some of the latest trends that are not as aggressive with the overall push of circulation with these thunderstorms, but there is that certain possibility that we can perhaps see the ongoing effects of this thunderstorm still making its push into the region. I'm just off screen for just a moment. We're going to put another storm track on here. The storm is estimated to be moving at about 40 miles per hour. So here are some of the latest communities that can be in the path of that particular part of the thunderstorm as we come back on camera. We'll move this over. Pine Park within the next 10 minutes or less. That's on the eastern side of Grady County, and then into Thomas County. We can see it moving towards the Thomasville area proper around 2:28 near the Pasco vicinity. Just before then, Booker Heights. So these are some communities and neighborhoods mostly on the west side of Thomasville and that's where much of this thunderstorm will start to move in, including near the Pebble Hill area, roughly around 2:20 to 2:30. So current time is 2:10. That gives you roughly 15 minutes. I'd say, just to be on the safe side, gives you 10 minutes of extra lead time to make sure folks within Thomas County proper, especially on the western side of the 84 bypass, gives you about 10 minutes of lead time to make sure that you have that shelter in mind and make your way there in advance of this thunderstorm. Not so much of a circulation, not as strong of a circulation as what we were monitoring before. The shear path, the shear track and rate have been on a downward trend where the overall twisting motion within a very confined area is not quite as strong as it was. There's still at least some broader circulation within this mass of rain and wind gusts, but maybe a little less of a definition of the tightness that we need to see, especially when it comes to the incoming wind that comes into the thunderstorm that creates the shear and the twist to begin with. We're seeing maybe a little less intensity based on these latest scans, but there's still a good bit of wind force that's being created by this thunderstorm as it continues to make its move towards the east along Highway 84. So there's a little less concern, in my opinion, for imminent tornado threats, but you still have the possibility of gusty winds, and that is the reason why our severe thunderstorm warning continues down from this thunderstorm through the 3 o'clock hour. In fact, right at 3 o'clock is when it's set to expire. But Thomasville, you're going to have some of this storm and its lightning. We mentioned lightning earlier. It is coming very frequently, very often, right in and around Cairo. That's going to be the scene moving towards Thomasville, maybe a slightly different form. Perhaps if those weakening shear trends continue, maybe less of a tornado risk, and perhaps maybe just needing the severe thunderstorm warning to tell the story of impending dangerous weather. But nonetheless, because of what this storm has already done, there's been a good bit of overall impact that this thunderstorm has already created. Director, let's go back to WSI 2, because it looks like now we're seeing at least a little extra darkening trend around the SRTC campus. A little steadier rain. The tall timbers there not really swaying a whole lot, but there is at least some movement in them, an indication that the winds are still kind of gusty. Travelers are still able to drive on 84, but keep in mind if you do have those zones where the thunderstorm was a bit stronger, a little more potent when it came to causing downed trees, and that was reported near the climax area earlier, make sure that you try to find your way around any kind of obstructions, especially if it comes to down power lines. Haven't heard much about power outages yet, but if trees fall on lines, snap lines, they can be live. And if they are just lingering there in the street, you really don't want to drive over them. So use extra caution. Maybe just stay home for a little bit. I know it's getting close to maybe school dismissal time in some cases. That can certainly be impacted for areas around Thomas County going into the next half hour. The thunderstorm is likely to continue to be able to cause excessive frequent lightning and maybe some gustier winds. So perhaps schools may have a rainy day or severe weather plan. They may have to put that into action considering the time that's coming up to dismiss some of our elementary schools. So that will be an issue going into the next few minutes as our thunderstorm continues to keep this tornado warning going here in central and east central Grady County. Officially, it's set to expire at 2:30, but we've already had at least a few reports of some wind-related damage coming in across this region. I'm going to try to throw on any kind of storm reports that may have already been indicated and already filtered through the system. So already you might see these little circles indicating where we've had some recent storm reports, especially near the Bainbridge area. That's where we had that one report of a 64-mile-per-hour gust at Decatur Airport. So that has been filtered through the system, and that is reportable. Other gusts of wind from earlier in the afternoon near the Bethany area, and that was one of the latest ones I was able to relay to you, thanks to Channing Frampton, who brought that note in to me. So we do have the overall trends of evidence. Not just the storm can cause damage or can cause wind-related effects. It has caused those effects, and there's still that possibility for at least some gusty winds, to say the least, in portions of Thomas County coming into the 2:30, 3 o'clock time frame. So that is going to be an area where we do not have imminent tornado risk right now, but we are certainly still under a tornado watch. That does include Thomas County and goes all the way to Lanier County. So this thunderstorm complex is still kind of weak on its northern end, Perhaps where we haven't had so much warm air coming in, but we've had a warm front lifting in. So where we do have that warmer influence and the stronger south wind flow, that can keep the southern extent of this thunderstorm complex very active. As you see over towards the western areas, it kind of trails off and not really moving much south of the state line at this point. I wouldn't expect this to come right into Tallahassee necessarily. This is going to keep on moving to the east, maybe slightly south of due east, so we can see it kind of straddle the state line. Southern Thomas County, perhaps far northern Jefferson County. That accounts for the coverage of that severe thunderstorm warning that is in northwestern Jefferson County, because the outflowing gusts of wind from this can certainly cross the state line, maybe head towards the Monticello or the Dills, Alma, Fincher area, perhaps even close to Metcalf. But our ongoing severe thunderstorm warning does include Thomas County. Our ongoing tornado warning is still here in the heart of Grady County. I'm seeing less evidence of actual tight shear that would indicate an imminent tornado. There's still at least some mess when it comes to gusty winds in general, and that's natural for any kind of very hefty, severe thunderstorm like this one has been. But there hasn't been a whole lot of actual rotation being seen, and I haven't seen any kind of other indicators based on any kind of debris or anything else that's kind of picked up in the atmosphere. There's still at least some possibility for large hail that continues within this route here along 93. That's the southern edge of this thunderstorm. So near Cairo, maybe not so much of a hail risk, but maybe still some ongoing to the south along Highway 93. We'll use our threat tracker to show where we do have the highest possibility of hail, and that is indeed being shown here near the Midway area on Georgia 93 and southwest of there. Zooming in for maybe a few of these neighborhoods, Midway Road could be one area that's susceptible to some of that hail, and surrounding communities and neighborhoods and roadways and residential areas, those can be some zones where some hail is highly likely, especially to the west of the Midway Road area in the south central corridor of Grady County. So we are seeing more of the hail still being sustained in this southern edge of Grady County, less of the circulation, still at least some considerable wind gusts coming out of this and maybe affecting Cairo as well. But we're not seeing a whole lot of the actual low-level circulation that prompted the earlier tornado concerns. Now, the tornado warning has not been canceled. It can be canceled early if there's a lack of evidence that a tornado can form from this. And based on what we've been seeing, what we've been analyzing, the risk of a tornado touching the ground in the current phase of the storm is pretty low, but it's not zero. There's still at least some indications of that stronger inflow, but it's been weakening by quite a bit, I must say, over the last 5 minutes or so. So there's a little less of that swirl going on, but there's still the strong outflowing, downflowing rain and wind that comes with thunderstorms, generally speaking, and that can certainly keep the thunderstorm at a hazardous level where we still need to continue to track it. But again, if the tornado warning is canceled before 2:30, we'll certainly transition our coverage to other modes and platforms. But nonetheless, we still have the active thunderstorm and its history of creating strong gusty winds and frequent lightning and even some hail. It's still present, and it's still moving east at about 40 miles per hour, maybe about 10, 15 miles outside of Thomasville right now. So this will start to move in your region by 2:30 and beyond. So that's why you are still covered in that severe thunderstorm warning, where we have seen at least a history of some circulation that can put a tornado on the ground. You might have noticed taking off the lightning layer, there's just been a little shrinkage, if you will, of that tornado warning box in the eastern side of Grady County. So that kind of still focuses some circulation concerns near Cairo and just to the east of you, but maybe a slightly lower end risk, maybe a little less imminent when it came to the overall indicators from earlier, but there's still at least the ongoing trend where we can have some circulation going. And the official information from the National Weather Service on this update on the tornado warning is that it's moving over the rural parts of east central Grady County. Pine Park, as I mentioned earlier, that's one area that can certainly still have some gusty winds. It's moving to the east at about 30 miles per hour. The circulation, the rotation is kind of broad within this region, but near the Pine Park area, if there's still some ongoing adverse effects from this thunderstorm when it comes to the possibility of some circulation, It's going to be within that region around Pine Park, where it can be kind of broad, maybe not necessarily your classic looking cell that would create a tornado, but nonetheless, that is the point where we still have at least the ongoing focus for any kind of lingering shear that can cause some rotation in the base of the cloud. So again, midway to Pine Park, along Highway 84, if you do have the circulation, it would be confined within that region. So still a good idea, still a good reason over the next 10 minutes to continue to hold your shelter. In Cairo, you see this thunderstorm that is moving out of your region for the most part, at least when it comes to the highest risk of the circulation, but you still have some fairly heavy rain, steady rain that's going to continue for another few minutes. Watch along Highway 319, especially near the state line. Some gusty winds will start to move across that route, and I know folks drive up and down that very often on any given Monday, and today is going to be one of those days where the commute there is not going to be all that great thanks to the presence of this thunderstorm and its ability to create very nasty weather and driving conditions for areas impacted by the storm. The outflowing wind gusts are still pretty high, maybe not quite as strong as earlier. I wouldn't suspect a 64 mile per hour gust would come from this necessarily, but we definitely still have the possibilities of some wind-driven wind gusts being detected maybe about 1,000 to 2,000 feet up off the surface, around 30, 40, 45 miles per hour, especially in that midway area just to the south of Cairo. So we still have wind gusts. There are still going to be a particular concern. They may be more in the way of straight line wind gusts, though, across this portion of Grady County, and maybe less. I won't say no circulation, no rotation, but less rotation within these regions, and it just makes it a little harder for a tornado to fall from the cloud based on these weaker values when it comes to the shear product that we're seeing. So still a concern in Thomasville. Your thunderstorm is going to start to move in, especially near and south of the Rose City. You're going to continue to have some of those storm effects coming for you over the course of the next several minutes. Seems like the little extra curve that showed a very good indication of strong outflowing winds kind of getting a little more ragged. So again, these thunderstorms tend to kind of cycle through, and they can change their form and their abilities to create the same type of impactful weather like what we had in Bainbridge may not sustain itself in that same level of strength for lengthy amounts of time. But nonetheless, the thunderstorm itself is still holding together. You might notice a little bit of a line here in Quincy, Havana. That's the outflow boundary, if you will, from the heavier rain that's around the state line. So this can also become a focal point here in northeastern Gadsden, northern Leon County, of maybe some gustier outflow that can come into the northern edges of Leon County. So that's a good reason why that severe thunderstorm warning is still up in northern Leon County. There's still the chances for gustier winds and some of that heavier rain to come out of the parent thunderstorm. So you can have some of those effects getting closer to the Bradfordville area when it comes to gusty winds, or Highway 12, for example, perhaps even along 27. Maybe not so much severity, but definitely the feel of the winds picking up on the periphery of that thunderstorm. You can have those gustier winds moving into Havana, the Highway 12 area, Lake Ammonia, perhaps even as far south as Lake Jackson. So we'll monitor that. There's not a lot of storminess coming along with that, but we'll have to monitor just to see how things can develop in our current environment. But nonetheless, the severe thunderstorm warning continuing until 3 o'clock, including Thomas County. The thunderstorm itself set to moving right now into the western side of the county, but the tornado warning has not been stretched. We have not seen a new warning being issued for Thomas County when it comes to tornado risk. We still have the original warning that's set to expire in about 5 minutes here in the east central portions of Grady County, and that's what we're monitoring for the time being as it continues to move east at about 20 to 30 miles per hour rather. So in Thomasville, definitely be aware of the frequent lightning. It's going to start picking up. Be aware of some of the gustier winds that will come out of this thunderstorm. The heavy rain will start to pick up, and you could even still see at least some chances for hail. The hail history has continued to extend its way across Highway 93, set to move into, Highway 319, and you can still have at least some small to moderate hailstones. The probability is on the higher side of the possible range, and our storm threat analysis, exclusive to us here at First to Know Weather, also highlights that same area along 93 where we can have some of the larger hailstones. You can see maybe maximum size of about a quarter coin in diameter, so that's about 1-inch hail, and that's the threshold for severe level hail. That is an ongoing possibility along Georgia 93, and that can make its way towards, we'll say, the plantation areas. I think Eden Plantation, if I'm not mistaken, on the southwest side of Thomasville. So those are going to be some locations where hail is more likely, and you could also see it within the downtown area or western areas too in the next few minutes. So hail and gusty winds and lightning, those are the main hazards that folks in Thomasville should be aware of. The tornado risk continues to diminish to where it's just a rather broad circulation, but mostly a wind-driven feature here across sections of western Thomas County. But you also have the strong straight-line winds coming out of this system as well. And that can create hazardous travel, hazardous outdoor conditions in general over the course of the next 30 minutes here in Thomas County along 84, the bypass route as well, and 319. So we can still have some deteriorating weather conditions here in Thomas County, although the risk for a tornado continues to decrease by quite a bit. And checking the little alert tone that I heard from our National Weather Service folks, the tornado warning is going to expire, so we'll start to transition out of our coverage momentarily. A tornado watch does continue for most of our local counties across the Big Bend and southern Georgia. When I say Big Bend, I should be more specific. It's the I-10 counties from Jackson County through Madison County. That's where we have an ongoing tornado watch until 5 o'clock, and for most of our South Georgia counties. We'll probably start to see some of our counties in the southwest Georgia corner shaved off of that tornado watch, but it will still be in effect at least through the 5 o'clock hour, up through the I-75 corridor, and again up to the Withlacoochee River in our North Florida communities as well. So Tallahassee, you're kind of sitting on the sidelines right now, but I wouldn't necessarily disregard the storms that are happening just to the north, because we can have some of those storm effects at least straddling the state line between now and roughly 5 o'clock. Also, heavy rain has been a concern. You can have some occurrences of flash flooding. No flash flooding issues right now, but if you had some soaking rain and you still have more to come, that can create some standing water, and that can also be an additional hazard that we don't need but can still have from the intensity of some of this rain. Now, given the fact that the tornado warning will expire at 2:30, we'll go ahead and take you back to normal programming on ABC 27. We'll continue to follow this for another few minutes if the director is aware. We'll continue to follow this on our streaming channels, through our app, through our website, also through social media. We'll continue to track this thunderstorm on those digital platforms. So if you want more coverage and tracking of these storms, follow us there on our digital streams where you can get more information. But for now, we'll take you back to normal programming on the over-the-air ABC 27.